Gender inequality continues to manifest in unequal access to critical resources such as education, healthcare, land, credit, and technology. Despite important legal and policy gains, women and gender diverse individuals often face systemic barriers that limit their full participation in economic and social life. These disparities are particularly stark in rural and marginalized communities, where entrenched norms and discriminatory practices restrict women's control over assets and, importantly, decision making. Closing these gaps is not only a matter of justice, it is essential for unlocking the full potential of inclusive and sustainable development. It is also not a matter of mere conversations, but advocacy that needs to be backed by research and data. Today's symposium brings to fore some of that research by highlighting the interplay of gender with the challenges around measurement. It also looks at issues of climate change and the effectiveness of many well-meaning policies and programs. It hopes to surface the need for a more localized and nuanced approach required for gender-inclusive policymaking. In our view, all of us gathered here at the Gender Policy Symposium are creating a vital platform dedicated to fostering inclusive policymaking that truly reflect the diverse experiences and needs of both men and women. In our collective pursuit of equality and justice, inclusive policies serve as the cornerstone for sustainable social transformation. This symposium brings together passionate policymakers, advocates, experts, and community members to share insights, challenges, and innovative approaches to ensure that gender considerations are integrated at every level of policy design and implementation. So thank you once again for being here today.
Esteemed policymakers and fellow advocates for transformative change. A good morning to everybody, and today I'm here to present research findings that challenge fundamental assumptions about how we measure progress that's imperative. This research was a part of the effort to uncover measurement and metrics around how gender gap is being measured, and it contributes to the ongoing global conversation of measuring what matters most, ensuring that our analytical tools serve the goal of creating societies where every woman can realize her full potential, regardless of the pathway. It was an effort about 8 months which went into this report, which included a lot of secondary data analysis, as well as consultations with experts all across India to arrive at what we're presenting today. The report is titled The Global Gender Gap Index, The Need for Contextualized Insights. You know, the fundamental recognition was how we measure progress shapes where we invest resources, which policies we scale, and ultimately whose lives we improve. So looking at that, and the flow of the presentation is as follows. First, what we do in the report is we rethink global gap measurements, examining how current frameworks can better serve diverse policy contexts. Second, we assess gender disparities across global, regional, and national dimensions, recognizing that women's experiences vary fundamentally. Third, we provide an overview of the existing gender gap indices overall, and then the importance that the Global Gender Gap Index has taken in the discourse. Fourth, we propose a dual input-output approach that measures both what countries achieve and how they work towards equity. Finally, we offer evidence-based improvements for more inclusive measurement presenting, targeting both global and India-specific recommendations. Just setting a little bit of the context here. The critical global indicators provide essential context for a discussion. We observe a 25.7 percentage point difference between male and female labor force participation worldwide. Women globally dedicate 2.7 and sometimes more depending on the context, hours of unpaid work than men, reflecting contributions that deserve greater recognition. In our frameworks, the economic potential is substantial. Addressing gender gaps could enhance global GDP per capita by 20%. However, current trajectories suggest achieving parity requires approximately 131 years. And that's where I think we need to get serious on what we're really measuring. The second point which I want to make through the context is there's a lot of variations across different regions, and that has to be reflected in the measurement that we have. High-income countries demonstrate women's enhanced access to formal employment and comprehensive social protection systems, versus we look at low-income countries where the informal sector participation is very high, where Asia-Pacific region accounts for nearly 65% of the global informal workforce. Keeping these disparities and variations across regions, countries, and within countries is important for measurement. Just laying out the objectives which were there already in my slide, but just to give you a context here, what we wanted to do is the importance of contextualizing gender gap was also placed, looking at what is exactly being measured globally. Second, the global status of gender gap metrics also were looked at. All kinds of metrics were looked at, but then what happens is that the predominance is being taken by the Global Gender Gap Index. Third, we look at all what is existing and propose much more nuanced measurement frameworks, which are country specific, which can be tuned and over time also analyzed. Finally, we provide actionable recommendations. Just to give you an idea of the global gender gap, as mentioned earlier, the Global Gender Gap Index, published annually by World Economic Forum, has taken a lot of shape in the discourse, basically, both in terms of strategic decision making as well as academia. The index measures 4 key dimensions: economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. Published annually since 2006, this index has become the most widely referenced tool for measuring gender equality worldwide, ranking 146 countries in 2024. Given this prominence and policy influence, our analysis in this report focuses on strengthening the Global Gender Gap Index to better reflect diverse developmental contexts while preserving its valuable contributions to advancing gender equality discussions and measurement. The Global Gender Gap Index measures gender disparities, as I mentioned, in 4 domains listed here, on a scale of 0 to 1, where 1 represents complete parity and 0 represents complete disparity. The framework systematically assesses economic participation and opportunity through labor force participation rates, wage equality, professional advancement indicators, and educational attainment via literacy rates, enrollment across primary, secondary, tertiary education. Health and survival is a very limited indicator currently. It just measures sex ratio at birth and health life expectancy measures. And political empowerment by examining women's presentation in parliament, ministerial positions, and years with female heads of state over the past 50 years. These are the overall gender measurement which exists in the ecosystem, but like I said, the Global Gender Gap Index has taken the most predominance in the discourse. Now, what are some of the limitations if we think of the measurement here? The core challenge is we're applying one universal standard to radically different realities. This misses how different economies actually work and where women contribute most significantly. For example, take the informal economy. According to PLFS reports, among rural women working in family enterprises, agriculture counts for overwhelming majority. However, women working are invisible in these indices despite driving local economies. On the other hand, health has just 2 indicators, ignoring nutrition. Health access fundamentally shapes women's opportunities, right? So these are some of the things that came out when we actually took a deep dive into the metrics and went indicator by indicator and saw where it can be strengthened further. Now, the answer lies in developing a country-specific measurement that recognizes dramatic development pathways, vary across different economic and social structures. Context measurement becomes essential because development pathways, like I said, vary. When measurement systems miss genuine progress, they misdirect policy interventions, and that's where we need to kind of really care about this measurement. We just propose a framework that looks at two essential dimensions simultaneously. Now, this is to track progress and also say where we are putting in our resources and how the outcomes are getting shaped. First, we need to measure the system enablers. These are the investments countries making education, health, and digital connectivity, legal reform, institutional capacity building. Second, we must continue measuring outcome indicators which capture the tangible changes actually happening in women's lives. We're talking about real shifts, whether financial independence, meaningful participation in leadership, and then how it shapes them. So this input-output approach helps in that. With respect to the action measurement itself, these are some of the things that we're proposing. Now, these recommendations aim to make gender gap measurement more inclusive, nuanced, and reflective of real-world progress. First, we recommend the addition of social equity domain, which does not exist right now, which focuses not only on equal access, but also addresses unequal starting points. Second, the index must account for countries' economic context, and this is something that we found missing, where it's a cross-sectional index which looks at all the countries ranked but then the progress is completely missing. So trend analysis also is required to say where the countries started off and how they have moved, because that is not there in the discourse at all. And the economic status and the context matters, because without that we are comparing apples to oranges. So that's another thing that we propose that needs to be done in the Global Gender Gap Index to contextualize it better. Expanding the range of indicators within each domain. For example, the health domain could go beyond just life expectancy, adding indicators like access to nutrition or anemia prevalence to provide a more complete picture. This is just one example, and it came out from multiple expert consultations. A lot of these indicators are already available for many countries across the globe, and they can just be added on. Fourth, we suggest strengthening economic participation metrics, including indicators like unpaid care work, post-childbirth employment, and financial inclusion. Fifth, educational attainment and political representation should include grassroots leadership and digital access. Lastly, tracking country-level trends. As I said, it's not just the cross-sectional journey, but it's also how the countries have progressed over a period of time. So that part has to be added as an addendum, is what we propose. For India specific now, when we're doing global comparisons, we often are limited with the set of indicators we use, because not all data is available across all contexts. But for that, we look at an India-specific analytical enhancement. If you want to really make progress on gender gap within India, we look at first, we propose a national level framework where we say that the current index does not account for women in informal workforce who made up significant portion. We recommend using time use surveys and integrating informal sector participation, because we're getting better data as we speak on these indicators in India, and those can be included. Second, in the domain of political representation, we propose expanding the scope beyond national level indicators. In India, local governance structures like the Panchayati Raj institutions and also leadership structures like self-help groups can be looked at when we are looking at these indices. And their exclusion underrepresents grassroots political empowerment, right? So we need that India can actually use the decentralized governance model, which can be built into the framework. Finally, the input-output measurement, which I had proposed, to see and track progress over a period of time in terms of the inputs that we're giving in and what outcomes are actually coming ahead. Just putting this slide here to, justify what I was just talking about, India-specific analytical enhancements. Now, as we look at it ahead, it's clear that effective measurement is the foundation of effective policy making. It helps us understand not only where disparities exist, but also what's working, where to direct resources, and how to strengthen what's already in place. Importantly, it reminds us that there's no single path to gender equality, that diversity must be reflected in how we measure progress. And that's where our report kind of speaks to the dialogue on contextualizing these metrics and making sure that the global indices account for contextual elements, as well as at the national level we can do a lot more because we have more indicators to actually show meaningful progress over a period of time. With that, I would also like to thank and acknowledge the team who made all of this research possible. Asta and Sayali were my co-researchers who helped me in this, and all the experts, practitioners and policymakers who shared their valuable insights during consultations to make better measurement actually available for better policy. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Professor Ramiredi. I request all the dignitaries to please launch the report. We now invite Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, Director, Madras School of Economics, to present his findings on the report titled Gender Mainstreaming in Public Policy and Impact Assessment of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin and Jal Jeevan Mission on Bridging Gender Inequalities in India.
First of all, let me thank Karmanya Council for giving this opportunity to work on this study. And I would also like to mention here that this is the continuation of the work that we have done sometime in 2024, where our first report on mainstreaming gender budget was released by Madam Smriti Irani, and this is the report that we have. And this is the follow-up work on what we have done in the last. I think in terms of the background, as I said, this is the continuation of the work that we have done last time. And since 2024, there are many things that happened, and we are very glad some of the recommendations that we made in the previous report was actually been implemented, and I'm thankful to Madam Smriti Irani for taking up that recommendations. In terms of the background, I'm sure all the audience here know very well, gender budgeting is more of a fiscal tool in terms of mainstreaming gender in overall public policy making, and in fact it also helps in switching resources between the programs and also switching the attention of the governments towards women-led development. And as Ms. Rinjin pointed out in the initial remarks, since India's G20 presidency, I think the women-led development has come to the center stage, and I'm glad that many things are happening that women-led development. But unfortunately, the kind of budget that we have right now, we have completed 2 decades under the gender budgeting exercise. Unfortunately, in my view, at least based on what we have right now, is more of an exposed analysis, more of a static, and also a simple accounting procedure. I think we all have to accept it. There is not much that happens from gender budgeting back to the program that is already being included in the line department and line ministry. What we do in this report is trying to integrate the gender budgeting framework to the gender outcomes in a circular way. I think that's more important, more of a dynamic way that we need to really look at. So in the report we look at what is the status of gender inequality. In fact, the previous presentation very nicely, eloquently presented the kind of limitation that we have in terms of the global indicators. And then we'll come to the status of gender budgeting in India and also in Indian states. And in this report, we look at 2 public policy interventions that has potential to reduce gender gap, that is rural housing scheme, that is Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin, and also the Jal Jeevan Mission, which has started in 2019. And we also propose an analytical framework, and then we bring out some of the, we undertake field study in 2 states, that is Rajasthan and Andhra Pradesh, and we bring out some preliminary findings from that field survey. And later, we propose what kind of a feedback loop that we can have from the outcomes of the line ministries towards going back to the gender budgeting framework. I'm sure all of you know about all these things, particularly the way gender budget assessments have been made in the country. We know that's very popular statement 13, both in the central government as well as state government budgets. And we also know that all the governments have established gender budgeting cells. But as we argue, we need to have both ex ante and ex post analysis when it comes to schemes. Right now, the more emphasis on outlays, what we call inputs, not much really on the outcomes. But even if you look at the post implementation, even the auditing that happens even at the scheme level, it generally has very limited gender lens when it comes to line departments. And we know the gender budgeting cycle, there are 5 phases, and what we need to focus more on the phase 1 as well as phase 5, and that's exactly where we need to really have the cycle when it comes to gender budgeting. In terms of the gender inequality status, again, as the previous speaker pointed out, in our report, in the previous report also, we highlighted some of the limitations of the international indicators. If you look at the recent number that we have for the 2025, the World Economic Forum says that India's rank has actually slipped 131, but if you look at the details, you will see that some of the indicators, they actually use the world database. For instance, if you look at the gender gap in the labor force participation, they use 2023. If they have used 23-24 numbers, you would have seen that improvement in the rank. I think that is, in fact, that is what I was looking at in detail, particularly all the 14 indicators that have been there in the World Economic Forum index. In fact, in the previous report, we identified the missing of third time representation. Even if, again, I'm sure the previous study has taken care, if you actually integrate the third tier representation, you would certainly see the fourth component, the political participation, where exactly we are slipping in the last 2-3 years, would see a much better ranking. And I think we need to be a little more forcefully presenting this concept when it comes to estimation of gender gap index. Out of the 4 sub-indices, I think 3 out of 3 actually, economic participation, educational attainments, health and survival, we have done very well. As I said, the political empowerment is one thing that we actually slipped in the last 2 rounds. But more concern is on the female labor force participation. As I said, there is a gap of about 41%. And even if you look at the wage earnings, the report says that men earn 3 times more than women. And this is certainly a major policy concern for all of us, and that needs to be taken care. There are many indicators one can look at. This is one thing I thought I will highlight. I think all the policymakers who are here, I think this is the crux of gender inequality that, in my view, that needs to be addressed. When you look at labor force participation, there is certainly a positive trend when you look at the male labor force participation from 2017-18 to 23-24. We have seen an increase from 23% to 41%. But then there's still a big gap of about 37% between these two, between 2017, 18 and 20. Of course, in the report there are many other indicators, but I am not highlighting all those. So labor force participation becomes a very, very crucial variable for reducing gender gaps. In terms of gender budgeting, I think these are all very positive. We have seen a substantial increase in the allocation of the budgets. Again, thanks to Madam Smriti Irani. In fact, when we were having the discussion of the previous report, that was the time we realized Jal Jeevan Mission was not part of the gender budgeting, and I'm glad you brought it, Madam, under that into the 24-25 budget. And then we also recommended to have Part C in our report. Again, I'm glad that this has also been included. So in all, we do see a substantial increase in the gender budgeting as a ratio to total budget. But there is a risk also in this. If you look at some of the schemes, they're actually getting into that saturation. Particularly if you look at the major schemes like rural housing, even urban housing for that matter, even the Jal Jeevan Mission, there is actually a saturation, it's going to reach some kind of saturation level. So these are numbers, I'm not getting into it. I think they're in the report, and you will see that about 7 or 8 schemes cover almost 75% of the overall general budget. And if you add MGNRGs with the Ministry of Rural Development, the Rural Development Ministry becomes, almost 25% of contribution comes from the Rural Development Ministry, and then PMGKAY, again it's about 1/4 of the general budget. So, as I said, since there are some schemes which are actually getting saturation level, this actually need to be relooked at. What are the schemes that needs to be included in the general budget should be relooked at. At the state level, I think there is a wide divergence. You see that Gujarat is actually having 37.4% as a total, as part of as a ratio to total budget goes to the general budgeting. But I do see that one of the major states like Telangana is still not initiated general budgeting in the states. This is a slightly dated like 24-25, but they're trying to estimate 25-26, but it was so difficult. I think the general budgeting should also include the share of general budget to the total budget. One simple line would help a lot of researchers. Otherwise, you need to end up looking at all the documents to estimate these simple statistics. So in terms of it's not changing. It's not changing.
It's changed. It's changed.
Oh, right. In this study, what we do is we look at two major interventions, that is rural housing and Jal Jeevan Mission, and I'm sure all of you know about the role of housing as well as drinking water facility that will help in reducing gender gaps, and the allocations are also substantial. If you look at PMAY allocation was about 54,000 crores. In fact, if you look at the Jal Jeevan Mission, it was a very massive feat in my view. In 2019, it started the scheme, where at that point of time, only about 16.7% households were having tap connections, and right now it's about 81%. It was a matter of 4 or 5 years. We have seen a substantial increase in the number of tap water connections given to households, and I think in a matter of 1 or 2 years, we'll see that a saturation is happening in the Jal Jeevan Mission scheme. In terms of analytical framework, we propose a outlay, output, and outcome framework, mapping some of the schemes outcomes with gender gaps. But I also would like to caution that outcome of a scheme is just an output when it comes to gender framework. So that is something that we need to realize. The housing or a tap connection is just an output when it comes to gender lens, and I think that's only a starting point for gender budgeting. It should not be the end point in my view. So that is something that we derive in our own assessment. I have been working on these topics for almost 12-13 years. Almost all the rural development programs I have done, housing scheme I have done. We also did some work for Ladli Behna scheme in Madhya Pradesh. So in all the places, what we realized is there is no role of GBCs when the program has been discussed. In fact, it's only the exposed. Once you have a scheme, then you include it in the general budget. I think that is, in my view, is not a effective way. So we argue in this report, you need to have a feedback loop where you come back to the line ministries or the line schemes, how you can actually reduce gender gaps. Otherwise, as I said, just housing or a tap is only an output when it comes to gender discourse. So this is the proposed framework that we had, where you have outlays, output and outcome framework, and it doesn't stop at outcomes. I think that's a very important point that we want to make it. I think you need to come back to the either schemes or the new schemes which the WCD can propose to reduce gender gaps. South we have 2 states, and within Rajasthan we took up desert districts as well as plains, and also in Andhra Pradesh we took a drier state as well as a state which has much better water facilities like Kakinada. We took about 1,000 households. These are the states that we have taken, and we looked at the districts in each state, and then we have taken 2 blocks in each district, so we have about 1,000 households that we have covered. This was in the midst of Operation Sindoor. We were doing this work in the district of Vellore, so it took some time for us to complete that work. So what we expect from this, from the data that we have, is that we should expect a positive change in terms of employment status of the women, both in principal as well as subsidiary status. In terms of health indicator, we should expect a number of times the household fallen sick. We should expect a better study space for the children. We should expect number of hours available for children also positive. And then we should expect reduction in the time spent by the women in fetching water. And we should expect positive increase in the community time spent by the women. I think these are some of the hypotheses that we have. So major finding is that we do clearly see that there is an improvement in the quality of expenditures when it comes to housing, from repairs and maintenance to investments. So that is clearly found in the PMAY. There is also a positive shift in the consumption basket, where you shift from just cereals to protein-rich items. Out-of-pocket expenditures have actually reduced. There is also increase in the children spending time for studies. Again, this is the positive shift that we see. But when it comes to between the state, that Andhra Pradesh and Rajasthan, while Andhra Pradesh we have seen a better water quality, a number of times the water coming to the household has actually more than in Rajasthan. And I think that's also mapped with the medical expenses that both the states have, at least the survey has shown. In Rajasthan, the release of water seems to be less frequent, and I think that's something, particularly in Jellore district, we found that number of times the water comes in the household is actually less compared to even Ajmer. So that is very clearly shown there. In fact, that helped us to use the Jellore district as a control group and Ajmer as a treatment group when it comes to empirical analysis.
We move to our first panel discussion titled Realizing Women's Potential through Closing the Gender Gap Towards Women-Led Development. This panel will be moderated.
Recognizes the importance of gender equality and aims to break down barriers that have historically limited women's participation and contributions in various aspects of development. So the idea of unlocking the gender dividend is now well recognized, both in India and around the world. The gender dividend represents the vast potential returns that businesses, economies, and societies can realize by embracing gender diversity, particularly in leadership across the workforce. According to a McKinsey report some years ago, it was stated in that report that India can add up to 18% of its GDP, provided it bridges its gender equality gap by improving female workforce participation throughout the country. So this morning we have seen the release of reports that talk about gender disparities and how the government is moving towards gender mainstreaming in public policies. So both the government and industries have made significant effort in bridging the gender gap by bringing about various inclusive policies. While significant progress has certainly been made, we continue to face challenges ranging from structural barriers and organizational culture to unconscious biases and enduring stereotypes that prevent full gender equality. And Professor Bhanumurthy also highlighted the fact that implementation and the proper implementation could be a roadblock that we need to streamline. To put it into perspective, India ranks 129th out of 146 in the Global Gender Gap Report 2024, down from 127th in 2023, despite closing 64.1% of its gender gap. So despite measuring this gender gap across some important aspects, such global indices often overlook context-specific issues like regional disparities, informal work, unpaid care, and deep-rooted social inequalities which are relevant in India. As we know, measurement drives change. What gets measured gets managed. So in the backdrop of persistent gender inequalities across various domains, it becomes imperative that we improve the existing tools of measurement and move towards a more nuanced approach. Such an approach will also lead to inclusive policy making, which ensures that policies are informed by real lived experiences, that they reflect the diverse needs of women across different regions and identities. So to discuss all of this, we have a very distinguished panel with us, bringing a rich diversity of experience and perspectives. Let me now introduce you to them. Smriti Irani really needs no introduction, but she's been the driving force and the founder of the Alliance for Global Good, Gender Equity and Equality, and ex-cabinet minister, Government of India. She's held pivotal cabinet positions leading transformative initiatives across different ministries of education, textiles, women and child development, and minority affairs. We are also joined by Dr. Shamika Ravi, who currently serves as member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and Secretary to Government of India. Dr. Ravi has also served as the Director of Research at Brookings India and Vice President Economic Policy at the Observer Research Foundation. We have on the dais today Ms. Isabel Sean, Deputy Resident Representative of India at UNDP. Prior to this, she served as the Deputy Resident Representative of UNDP at Burkina Faso and as Governance and Peace Building Team Leader at UNDP Regional Hub for Europe and Central Asia in Istanbul. We are also joined by Dr. Ratna Sahai, who has served as Senior Advisor on Gender and Special Advisor to the Managing Director at IMF and currently serves as Professor at National Council of Applied Economic Research. Last but not the least, Ms. Soumya Kapoor Mehta joins us. She is the Senior Economist with the India Country Management Unit of the World Bank. Prior to this, Soumya has served as the Task Team Leader for the India Gender and Social Inclusion Platform at World Bank. I will now take my seat back in the panel and shoot the questions to our panelists. Both promote gender equity in this country and what are some of those that are still continuing to hinder?
That is a very tough question. Because what you're assuming is that we have a very good understanding of how things are. That's number one. Number two, that we have adequate research empirically, not theoretically. The framework hai, we know those things. We've known it for a while. There have been dramatic changes in this country in the last 10 years. And the reason why 12 years is because we have exceptional data in the form of the household consumption expenditure survey, which gives you very detailed measurement in terms of even kilograms of how much food people are eating, of what kinds, from which we estimate poverty. So now we know that poverty in India has fallen, if you look at the Rangarajan line, which is moderate, it's not just food. From 29.5 it is down to 3 point. Right? So that dramatic change itself is quite remarkable. And that is something you're hearing a lot of the institutions, World Bank, OECD, people are picking this up as they should. What is less understood is that this data allows you to do something more. You see, when you measure poverty, suppose a household is spending 10,000 rupees and there are 4 members in the household, you're assuming every member is spending 2,500. But you know that's not true. You know that equal sharing doesn't quite happen within the household, and those are the kind of inequities we are also trying to address through these kind of gatherings and people. No? If you're able to look at this data at assignable expenditure, then again you can estimate poverty. So imagine if poverty has fallen to 3.9 overall, you should be thrilled at the finding that women's poverty is down to 2.1%. So it's almost half of the national average. If you actually look at the spending within the household on individuals, so we have actually made far more progress than we actually understand, appreciate, or even we are measuring appropriately. So this is a call to the scholars in the room, that this is a time when you see the government, the political leadership has a theory. This whole saturation policy where basic amenities will be made available to all citizens everywhere. That basket itself is expanding, right? Housing, water, mobile, bank accounts, toilets. That basket has been expanding because we do have the means to do it. And we will continue expanding it. But what impact is it having in terms of not just average poverty, but individual level poverty is something now we are in a position to estimate. So women actually have benefited far more. If you just look at poverty, poverty is consumption expenditure. How much am I spending on food, clothing, footwear, whatever, right? Other than that, now getting to the kind of issue that Bhanu is talking, and why am I talking about poverty? Because it's almost like an ultimate outcome, a composite metric of well-being. That's why poverty is such an important thing to look at. Beyond that, if we see, there is a fundamental problem, Manjuji. You know, when we try to look at the old existing metrics, whichever indices we're trying to mechanically superimpose it on a continent of a country, which is undergoing tremendous social economic transformation, and we say female labor force participation must grow. Show me the switch, number one. It's not a mechanical outcome, it's an outcome of multiple things that are happening. But this is also a time we must ask fundamental questions. Are those the metrics we should be really throwing our weight behind? Because globally, declining fertility is closely linked to female labor force participation. We have estimated, when she was still at WCD, 17 to 18% of GDP is the value of care in the household. But we don't measure it, right? And as economists, we have a quick fix. Statistically, I can put a shadow price, and I know this is 18% of GDP. Wow, wonderful. And so your GDP increases if we do statistically. But what exactly are we saying? That it is a non-marketed activity. So it's almost like if I go to her house and cook, and she comes to my house and cooks, the GDP at least within the two households will increase substantially. Because it's a marketed activity. Please, I'm saying something extremely important and telling you of how narrow view and frameworks are not going to serve us. If we just say that only when the women does marketed activity is it of value to the economy. That's not true. Care, and here it goes to another thing, that amenities, pani hai, bijli hai, all of these wonderful things will free up women, as we are all finding in the data. But you see those chores which in the household you're doing and it is unpaid, that time will get freed up. But what about care? Have we reached a stage where care can then be either outsourced or mechanized or not that much? Because one, the market is highly underdeveloped, and second, socially, how many of us are prepared to have a conversation that the West is still not having? What did the pandemic show us? That the breakdown of the traditional family structure has seen the largest number of elderly people die alone without a kin around, no family member. That is the outcome of the development model. If we just ape the West and treat everything they have valued so far as something of value, we are going to reach there. How prepared are you? Urban India, fertility rate has been below replacement for 25 years. Now we are waking up to all India decline, TK. But urban women have already told you we don't want to have 2 kids. 25 years back, sir. So there are tectonic shifts that are happening, and this is for us, we can't just mimic these debates because we are still at a per capita, we have just come out of poverty. So for us to have a working age population which is shrinking relative to an expanding, aging population means at this level of income, how do we even sustain basic quality of life? So these are very large problems for which simply looking at these indices, which as serious economists, let me tell you, this is nothing but khichdi making. We throw everything into an index. अरे उसमें अलग-अलग weightages होते हैं. That is what both the scholars have just told you. Which of those ingredients, खिचड़ी में आप सिर्फ one thing you throw in, it's a weightage issue. How much do you weigh which variable? And that is fundamentally linked to, as an economy, what is it that we are struggling with? That is your question.
Yes.
It's an empirical question.
Yes.
We are struggling with the fact that our women are more educated than ever. But we have not freed them up. It's not a happy choice we are making. Which means, as a country, big investment in care, big investment in giving women actual choice and valuing their choice if they actually choose to stay in the house and raise a good family and healthy children. But that's a value system. None of our international agencies will tell us, oh, your labor force participation is at 45, 50, okay. But the mothers are in the household and the children are happy, whatever. I'm just saying, don't mechanically lift things and fit them because the world around us has adequately shown that that is not a happy situation.
Right. No, so I think very well explained, Shalakan, and thank you for that. But there is one other problem that I see. Often we tend to look at, like you said, poverty is on the decline. There is great need for us to look at disaggregated data to know exactly how, and in India being such a large country, even regional differences can point us to very different pictures if we don't do that, right? So one is, of course, looking at what indicators, how you measure, when you measure, and then also making sure that we collect all those data and look at it in a disaggregated way. So there's a long way for us to go, but I'm glad we're talking about it now, hopefully.
Just to tell you, because we are working very closely with MOSPI, we will have district level estimates.
Okay.
We have already moved from national level to good state, and we are having it annually now. But every 2 to 3 years, we will have district level estimates. So disaggregate data to help.
Okay.
We have also moved from state to district. Aspirational district, huh?
Yes.
India,
Yes.
average district is 2 million people, by the way. The mammoth
Absolutely.
country. We have gone to aspirational blocks now. So truly we are in the realm of what is called precision policy making. No more all India.
That's right. Okay, great, thank you. Let me turn to Ratna. Ratna's actually done a lot of work both in IMF, and we had a discussion a few months ago where I was intrigued to know the kind of work that she was doing. So based on your work, Ratna, on gender mainstreaming strategies and all of that, what are some of the key lessons that India can learn from?
Thanks very much for inviting me, and I really want to congratulate you and Smriti ji for the work that you're undertaking. It's totally inspiring, and I'm glad to see Shanika here too. And I really hope I can work with them because I've, after 33 years of the IMF working on macro and actually quite secretly working on gender and inclusion because it wasn't part of the IMF's work, and my bosses would always tell me, you do my work, what you do at home, I don't care. If you want to do it, do it. Until the managing directors became female. And it was such a turning point, and this is how the last thing I did at the IMF was launch a gender mainstreaming strategy for 190 member countries at the global level. And the MD said, bring it to the board, there's no need to hide your work. And so I brought it to the board, and we got like 93% vote. I don't want to tell you which countries did not vote. We'll do that later. So I am really delighted, and it's, it's in that context. When I started looking at the numbers on India, I was turning red. I mean, I've seen so many women succeed, Indian women. I didn't know that we were so behind on the gender gaps across various dimensions. Labor force participation is only one, and that's what got inspired. I was very inspired. I said, I'm going to quit. I quit actually before retirement, and I said, I'm going to go to India and just work on gender. So that's what I've done for the last 2 years. I'm catching up, I'm learning from all of you. I'm writing a lot of papers, and I'd love to contribute more. So just very quickly, in terms of gender mainstreaming strategy, I mean, I really want to post this for all of you, especially Smriti Irani ji, now that you have a little more time on this. I really think that India should launch a national gender mainstreaming strategy. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is, you already have a vision. We have a fantastic Prime Minister in the G20 committed to empowerment of women and gender-led development, which was again adopted by G20 countries. So the vision is there. The strategy is really developing a framework which cuts across all sectors with monitorable actions and very strict timelines, and then comes stock taking. So, and then the publication of this, how we are doing across various dimensions. And of course, from ground up, you get the data, etc. That's why all these numbers, disaggregated data make sense. To my knowledge, there are no countries who have this big picture national gender mainstreaming strategy. But what I am aware of is, the national financial inclusion strategies, which India has done phenomenally well. There are 60 countries that adopted it, and amazingly enough, the countries that have done the best are the ones who did have national strategies, which then went to state level and sectoral level, etc. So I just wanted to put that on board, and there's a national Alliance of Financial Inclusion that actually, it's a third body, international, which gives awards to countries for the progress they make. And we could get the UN women to do that, from India. So that's one thing that I wanted to say. I don't want to dwell too much. I was going to talk a lot about the care economy, but Shamika has already talked about the importance, and I think I can't tell you how critical it is. I just last year, for 2 years, I served on the World Economic Forum. They had a special future council on the care economy, on the future of the care economy. And I'll just say in one sentence of the big conclusion that we all ignore the workforce behind the workforce, which are all the people who are working, and whether paid or unpaid. And actually, if they are paid, they are really underpaid. The nurses, all the others. So no country can sustain inclusive and sustainable growth without really empowering the workforce behind the workforce, let me call it, whether at home or outside. The third one I wanted to say is the work I've done with my co-author Akash, who's here, and this is about modifying the labor laws in just one particular respect, and that is to introduce formal part-time work on a daily basis. It doesn't exist in India, which I was so shocked to learn. Advanced economies have it. But what that means is the part-time workers also have similar benefits that full-time workers have. This is going to help increase female labor force participation a lot. And the work that I did with Akash, which was more a simulation work, we found that female labor force participation would go up by a good 6% just by introducing, the definition and recognizing part-time work in India. And of course, also, this is a tougher one, but how to ensure more equitable burden sharing at home between the husband and wife. This is a cultural, a lot of work needs to go into that. But absolutely, the elderly care and the daycare facilities are going to help, but they have to be of good quality. Fourth one, let me just mention, female leadership, the one that you're focusing on, is so critical. Some work I've done with Mehak is also here. We found, this was a cross-country work, that when there are more women ministers and members in parliaments, the countries that have the more, first of all, are the ones that did have formal quotas. I grew up thinking formal quotas are bad because then they'll think I made it because of quota. But it's amazing how it works. Anyway, but what we also found that, when there are more female leaders, they spend 15% more on education and health. And moreover, the health outcomes and education outcomes are also better in terms of access to water, mortality rate, secondary schooling, etc. And very quickly, let me just mention the last two, because we talked a lot about that, where gender responsive budgeting is actually critical. And there are so many countries that have adopted it, and the IMF is very focused on that, but we realize they're not well implemented at all. So it's on paper. And then, of course, gender disaggregated data is absolutely critical. So let me just stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ratna. I think you pointed to the fact, and I've heard Smriti saying this in several fora earlier, that our financial inclusion models and what we have is a clear success story that we can, share with the world. That's definitely something that we're all very proud of. That's happened. On the care economy, I agree. I think there's lots of work to be done, and very, very quickly, so that we are able to then actually kill two birds with one stone. Both have solutions that will work for us, and secondly, then also take care of the unpaid work that never sees, an inclusion in the GDP formally, and therefore that is something. But on your idea of the part-time working, I think things are changing for the country, even for men, not just for women, post-COVID. And more organizations are realizing that we may have to allow that to get better productivity, etc. So hopefully that will work for us. In the manufacturing sector, of course, I think we've come a little, we made progress because there were very stringent rules about having women on the shop floor, having the right, you had to have regulations, take care of having women working in second and third shifts, night shifts. So that, I think we're making slow progress, and within CII, we are tracking how many organizations are actually celebrating women on the shop floor and doing well for that. So I think there's happy news there as well.
Can I just add one more thing, because that's recent work again, now with one of my colleagues, Nadia, we did on the corporate sector, women's leadership. It was amazing. There was a company's law in 2013 which mandated at least one woman on the boards of every listed companies. And we found, and this was the amazing result, that it really worked, because there were penalties if you didn't do it. It worked in the sense, by now there are not just, the average is not just one woman, it's two. And I'll give you a very good reason. It's not because favor was being done, because companies found actually having women is profitable for them. So we find that these companies with more balanced board are more profitable, they have less debt equity ratio. So it's really working. This quota has really worked. Where it's amazing, 50% of these companies don't even have a single woman in top management. And a lot of work needs to get done. So.
True. There's still work to be done. Okay, thank you, Ratna. Let me come to you, Sonia. So we've been focusing on what are some of the most critical investments that can truly unlock women's economic agency across diverse regions.
Thank you, Ranju, and great to, and very difficult to follow Shamika and Ratnaji on many of these aspects. But I'd just like to say that in addition to the kind of tectonic shifts that Shamika was talking about, I think it's also, we should acknowledge the kind of policy emphasis that you see in India on gender for the past 10 years. It's very rare to see a country fighting in G20 for a phrase like women-led development. It's very rare to say that, women should not just be beneficiaries in programs, and how do you fill the gender gaps and get gender parity to 50%, but saying, no, honestly, they should be driving it. So actually, female labor force participation sooner or later would come to parity, but at the same time, we have to look at quality of jobs, we have to look at the kind of jobs women do. A lot of the PLFS data that is being captured on the increase is actually acknowledgement of unpaid work. But then how do we get women into more paid work is also, because money, as we know, of course, increases them and their, empowerment and also voices in their household. But coming to infrastructure and services, some of our research has identified few critical infrastructures. The first is really, as the professor before us said, is safe transportation. But it's not just safe transportation to get from one central point in the city to another central point, it's last mile connectivity. Because for women, getting to their houses is really the issue, and that has to be safe. It has to be accompanied by sensitive urban planning on lighting, on having safe sort of corridors and lanes and gullies so that they reach home safely. It's a big issue for them. The second that I think, of course, the ministry is also, under MAM, started promoting it, was also the issue of thinking about working women hostels. I'll give you a small anecdote. We were doing a secondary, a higher education project in Madhya Pradesh, and we just visited one engineering college which had 3,000 people who had enrolled, which roughly half are women. When we asked them, what kind of course are you joining in engineering? Out of those 1,500 girls, only one had taken up civil engineering. Why? Because the parents and everybody said that, my brothers would be allowed to take it, but when I would go into a civil engineering course, my parents are very worried where I will live. Whether it has to be a safe accommodation, because not everybody has relatives, not everybody is comfortable with PGs. So working women hostels, I feel, can be a game changer, particularly as India urbanizes, and a lot of the chance, I think the education levels, women's participation in STEM, we've really crossed massive thresholds. But how do you get those women to work? You have to give them that kind of infrastructure. I think on care, Shamika is absolutely right. One is, of course, a choice, to see whether I would like to provide that care to my child. But also, honestly, it's also the absence of creches. India is very different compared to developed countries. That for us, the age of marriage, the age of childbearing kind of coincides with the time when we are entering the labour market. It's not as if we try and marry at 28, 29. Even now it's early. Even now our first child is early. Which means the moment I have a child who's between 0 to 3 years of age, I have no quality facility to take her to. Because I do not know, you can provide the creche, but parental trust in the space is very important. Now in rural areas, I think the government is really making a massive effort to start with the Palna scheme on 0 to 3. But in urban areas, where we really have a need, what do? We have to look at other models. We have to look at women, maybe as care entrepreneurs. Ultimately they are, every person who even comes and supports my daughter is a woman. But then how do you empower them? How do you give them credit? How do they open up their homes to run nurseries? How do you do accreditation for them? Does the government need to do accreditation? I think those are the kinds of questions we should be asking, particularly for urban areas. And then the last one infrastructure I'll talk about is toilets in schools. It's a game changer. What we are looking at amongst all the indicators, and I'll come to that in the second round on hopefully when we talk about human capital. India is not struggling with enrollment of girls. They are going to schools. They are going to colleges. They are struggling with completion. And the completion, if you still look at the kind of toilets are there, perhaps they're broken, they are not maintained. It's a big reason for girls not going to schools. particularly in secondary grades. So I think those would be the kind of infrastructure facilities I'd highlight. I think on services, massive investment going into skilling. But like nutrition, why are we not seeing placement? It's a double whammy for girls because we do not know where are the labor intermediation services. We do not, girls also don't have the social networks to say, here is a placement agency if I were to go. And if you go and see all, the kind of service that Ashwini Deshpande has been doing, at skilling centers with Skill India, you find that they are all going to the skill centers. But the parents will say, नौकरी इसके बाद कहाँ मिलेगी? कैसे placement होगा? कितने पैसे मिलेंगे? Those are the kind of questions of the bridging and the labor intermediation, strengthening our labor bureaus. Those are things we need to talk about. On services, I'll also mention, if you look at nutrition, honestly, the gender gap in stunting is not high. Everybody is stunted. Even 1/3 is stunted. But it is not as high. It's really after the age of 5, the kind of health services that girls get vis-a-vis boys, where the gender gaps start creeping in. And by the time they are into adolescence, anemia is a huge issue. And that definitely influences your labor productivity. And no, we have not had enough research to capture by the time, and then you are entering into marriage, and then, God forbid, into fertility. And then, you don't have a childcare center, and you drop out. And it's very difficult to come back. So I think we have to look at health services starting in adolescence or even younger ages. And the final thing I'll still talk about is marriage. I still think, although we've made huge strides in reducing child marriage, maybe some targeted emphasis on some districts, and like, you look at NFHS data, Lalitpur, some particular districts very, very high. Once you get into early marriage, you're really lost forever. Then you migrate, you do other things, you've lost your social networks. So I think those would be, and the final is, it's a sensitive thing to raise, is violence. It has huge health impacts. We need to strengthen our helplines, and I think a lot has already been done to do that. It's also just a question of connecting them to the community workers, because it's honestly very difficult for a woman to go to a police station or a thana. But all the models like Sneha or whatever has worked in Mumbai, it's really, I need to know my community worker who will take my case. I think that kind of service needs to be strengthened. So for now, that's all.
Okay, thank you. You did mention creches and the need for that, so that women can safely, kind of find a place to leave their children. I just want to draw attention to the fact that there are corporates now coming into that space. If you've heard about the Nandaghar program that the Vedanta group has brought in, I think it's seen tremendous pickup in the last few years. The quality is good, and a lot of the women are now using those facilities. So similarly with working women's hostels, etc., I think we need to get the private sector involved to a greater limit, right? And hopefully that will improve the kind of services and the management of that as well. So that's certainly something that we should focus on, and I agree with you. Toilets, not just in schools, in workplaces, more importantly, if women are outside their homes and just doing their work in the cities, where do they use the toilets? There aren't any of good quality. So, a lot of work on the infrastructure side, and whatever work we are doing on the urban development and rejuvenation of cities is concerned, I think we need to look at some of these through the lens of what women's needs are, right? And that will get us. Thank you for your comments. Let me turn to Isabel now. I think she's now well versed in what India needs and what India needs to do. The way she's comfortably wearing a sari and carrying it on. So, Isabel, from a UNDP perspective, what are some of the effective strategies for multi-stakeholder collaboration between the governments, civil society, that will help us to scale the gender responsive interventions?
Thank you so much, Ranjit, and thanks to the organizer for inviting us. And yes, I've been for 2 years in India now, so obviously I'm still learning a lot every day. But I really appreciate to be part of this panel. So strategies. Well, I think I will build on what the esteemed panelists have mentioned. Well, it's obviously the partnerships, right? Nobody can do it alone. And you mentioned government, you mentioned civil society, you mentioned, but also just before private sector. Private sector very important, but also working directly with the communities. I think that is very important, and in a context as diverse and as rich as India, intersectionality plays an important role. So we really need to understand this to ensure that no one is left behind, because women is not equal women, obviously. I know I don't, you're not learning anything, but I think that is quite important. And then I think the panelists have said to have evidence and disaggregated data. But I think it's this continuous engagement with the communities. It's not a one-off, it's a continuous engagement to listen and to ensure that their voice is taken into consideration. Let me just give you a few examples of UNDP's work in partnership with many others. And well, I will start with female labor force participation and care economy. Well, I could just build on to what was said before, and there the role of the private sector. I think it's very important, and specifically in urban settings for low-income families. So this is where we have a partnership together with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and the Gates Foundation, where we are looking at, well, what could be actually the models for creches, for childcare, and we are piloting even these models, and through the piloting, building this evidence and designing also the financial models. I mean, the financial models is very important. That links, I just want to mention also to the part-time work. I think that links extremely well to that, and it's very important to look at it together. And obviously part-time work for both men and women, where we also look at this positive masculinity. I think this is all just a complement to what the panelists have mentioned. So that is one example. Another example, and here I'm looking at this intersectionality, working with waste workers. We are having a partnership with the Ministry of Social Justice, the Ministry of Urban Affairs and Housing and Urban Affairs, but there also it's a public, private and people approach. What does it mean? It's all these partners coming together. You can look at the UN and UNDP a bit like a platform, right, where all partners are coming together, and where we are looking at, well, there are many good schemes, social welfare, social protection schemes. So how can we facilitate access of the beneficiaries to these schemes? So just one example is this Namaste scheme, where we are helping to facilitate outreach and resolve grievances and ensure that the workers know their rights. There is for now a number, it's a relatively small number in the Indian context, it's 23,000 waste workers, but it is just to demonstrate also, right? This can then be built at scale, and how the schemes can also be further improved. Another very vulnerable group of communities, obviously tribal communities. There I would like to give the example of our partnership which we have in one state, in Maharashtra. We have it in several states, but I'll just give you the example of Maharashtra with the Maharashtra Tribal Development Department. Well, it was mentioned, it's the dropout of the schools, right? And specifically, I mean, it was mentioned generally for girls, but specifically for the most vulnerable girls. Also, again, first building the evidence, having the research together with other partners, and then see how integrating menstrual health in the health policy, in the schooling policies, have monitoring systems and also improve SOPs. Another one is, well, and it was said in the very beginning, well, the third gender, working with transgender, and I think India is really leading worldwide on transgender rights. and also on the schemes which were put in place. Again, there we have been working for many years as a platform, working together, well, with the community, with the transgender community, with the government, so Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, Ministry of Health, National Human Rights Commission, with other UN agencies, UNAIDS, but also with private sector, and seeing, well, that's a framework which we have to establish for transgender welfare, and this has then really informed policy by the government. So, well, I would like to stop here. I think these are examples which...
The first time you can hear infrastructure and women in the same sentence. But the first time you're hearing about gaps, as Bhanu is trying to highlight, in gender budgeting, or the absence of gender budgeting cells at the grassroots. But the first time you're hearing conversations about time poverty and women. Women and care economy have, as a conversation, been mainstream because of the work that we did in the alliance in collaboration with Jamaica. That in itself, finding a resonance in the economic survey of India, was unimaginable a decade ago. Now we need to shift the focus to the economic imperative that gender brings. For too long, we as a nation have been told that if you give a house to a woman, she is empowered, and hence it will showcase itself in the equity vis-a-vis gender. Bhanu's report in fact says that that is not the only essential imperative. For too long we were told that women are disenfranchised because they have to go and fetch water. And if you only give them clean, accessible, drinking, potable water, their lives will change overnight. Bhanu in fact now highlights that is not a reality. For too long you were told that if you make sure every girl is enrolled in a school, that means that her academic empowerment will translate into economic achievement. Both Bhanu and Vidya have highlighted maybe that is a context that we were running around with because that was not a reality. Now that it is a reality, we are confronted with new challenges. So whoever presumed that if you do step one, everything which is unjustifiable vis-a-vis gender, you will find a quick solution. What this panel and those who have published the reports have highlighted is that one element is not good enough to have a holistic solution. People like Vidya and Bhanu come mainstream in the national capital and speak on these issues. For too long, individual economists, specialists who were not in the part or corridors of power, they never had an opportunity to present themselves if they were not aligned to those who were the power elite. So I'm very, very enthused by the fact that today under the Alliance in collaboration with CII, the Gates Foundation, we are giving more and more Indians across the country an opportunity to opine, an opportunity to reflect, and an opportunity to speak with statistical evidence. To have, let's say, Vidya's report on the Global Gender Gap Index. Seema Arora is here in the audience. She is a partner in crime at the World Economic Forum. And when we went to the World Economic Forum leadership and we said that your Global Gender Gap Index report tends to shame a particular geography geopolitically and is not used as an instrument to create equity, they were taken aback. And they said, what is the evidence? And we, without statistical evidence, but what is popularly available, publicly available, started making the case not only for India but for the Global South. Today I'm very proud that this report has come out where we provide context as to why we took a position as Indians at an international forum. But at the same time, it would be inconsiderate of us if we do not create partnerships around this report internationally. Who are the other nation states who have been not studied in detail, their national context, not taken into consideration, because the pathway to equity cannot be restricted to one geography, one nation state. It has to be reflective and resonate across geographies, across nations. I think what is also, and such resonance impacts agencies like the UNDP. As Isabel has said, that it's not only for the Global South but also the Global North, because the presumption was that the global north is devoid of any gender challenges. So India is one of those very rare countries which understands the institutions of the global north, which understands the realities of the global south and can be that bridge. The fact that through the alliance and programs and reports such as this, we are now statistically evidencing that bridge is what is the first good step that we have taken. From Bhanu's conversation, one would presume that WCD can weave magic across. But as somebody who has seen the political administrative realities in government and its impact on the geopolitical narrative, what is it that I would propose? We know that one ministry does not serve the issue of gender. We know that bureaucratically, even colleagues can be in competition. So how can gender not fall victim to that bureaucratic competition, that bureaucratic challenge? It is to ensure that bureaucratically this whole discourse is embedded under the Cabinet Secretariat. Additionally, if the government has envisaged a policy marker like Niti Aayog, which is an umbrella advisory for policy, where would I rather see the issue of gender budgeting find its voice so that it can disseminate it or it can direct it across policy fora, across ministries? Then for me, that organization, which is headed by the Prime Minister, is Niti Aayog. Additionally, there are people who are experts on economy who opine and their opinion is valued by the Prime Minister, who has led the gender issue from the front. So which is that advisory group which will have an economic impact and which is devoid of political affiliation and is only married to the statistics and realities statistically so of the country, which also looks at the country not in isolation, but it looks at it as a fulcrum possibly in terms of geopolitical realities, not only from the perspective of gender, but also how economies are evolving, technology is evolving the world over, and the economic realities of central banks across the world. That institution is the EAC where Shamika is. So if we genuinely want to see something tectonically shift as to how gender budget is envisaged, implemented, and is not reduced to just a complimentary footnote in a political speech, we need to make sure that these three things happen: CABSET, Niti Aayog, and the EAC. Now, if you have to do it for the EAC, what is the strategic change that you need to evidence for them? Reports such as this, which talk about time poverty, which talk about context in terms of insights of which all weighted realities matter. Reports such as the one Bhanu has come out with, that Awas Yojana was never considered a gender inclined Yojana. What happens when 73% women end up owning homes? And why is it that it's not resonating from a perspective of equity? Now, those economic realities which outside agencies are given to the EAC then become a template for the EAC to opine over, because they are at the helm of affairs where they are in receipt of much more sensitive data, where they can guide the Prime Minister's office as to these are the realities that you need to, given also how much the treasury may be constrained. One has to be very, very mindful of that. Because Bhanu talks about giving cash. Imagine giving cash to 10 crore beneficiaries under the nutrition scheme currently. If you are giving 10 crore citizens, according to Bhanu's map, 10,000 rupees a month, all the taxpayers now, their eyebrows are up. So, given that this is the sentiment with which Bhanu comes, this is the evidence that Bhanu comes with, how would then it get studied by Shamika and then be reported to the Prime Minister, who then can take a very, very studied opinion or action on this? That is what we need to build. Because for too long, we have just been satisfied with rhetoric. Now we have facts which can be applied to ensure gender justice. So I think that what has come through is also another issue between Soumya and Ratna. For Ratna, I had to say, I was at the IMF but I had to hide my gender work. That is again a reality that not many Indians have been confronted with. Because Indians have always been told that if you're in the IMF, they are more gender just than the average Indian. So those are the realities which also now have become a part of public discourse. That just because they're an international agency doesn't make them more proficient and efficient than us on the gender issue. I think what Soumya spoke about is not only building of infrastructure, but the quintessential trust of the average Indian woman in that infrastructure. I still remember my conversation with the infrastructure ministry to say, you know, what you're spending is actually gender budget as well. And they said, why? I'm building a bridge. I'm building a highway. How is that gender? I said, are you building a toilet or a rest space or a diaper station for a working mother? They said, yes, but I never thought that is gender. So what Bhanu says is, it may be outcome for some, it may be output for the other. But what these two studies, and particularly Bhanu's study, has highlighted, that maybe just building a road, a home, or giving water, or building a school was not enough. So what is enough? I think that is what needs to now get highlighted. Should we send Bhanu back to those very districts to ask what is needed? Because still you do not identify that what. You can't work towards it. So I think these two studies have been extremely, one has in fact in some way evidence what Seema and I have been fighting for 2 years. And for the first time in the history of India, we got a written acknowledgement from the World Economic Forum that yes, there are gaps and there are weights with regards to certain statistical realities that we have not considered. We shall consider. Can you show us the evidence? This is that evidence. The second part is, what Bhanu brings about, is the reality, what Soumya talks about, is the reality vis-a-vis not only narrative, but also trust. Those are not administrative political agendas, those are societal issues that need to be largely addressed. So gender, and in terms of impact, in terms of assessment, in terms of equity, and especially in terms of narrative, has to become quintessentially mainstream from a societal point of view. You have to, and I'm very, very grateful to CII for bringing us that platform for all of us to converge, that confluence of people on the CII platform. It is also essential, like Ratna said, that you have one woman on the board. How does that translate into an economic impact vis-a-vis the company? We now need to do the same. Shamika spoke about care economy. How does that translate into money? How do we impact money? Till now we have been talking about how money impacts us. We need to now turn the tables to say, how do we impact your economy, your money? And if we are left out, it's your loss. If you start quantifying that, you'll have many politicians wake up and suddenly embrace gender budgeting, making sure that the GBC, the gender budget cell shows up. We have to make it economically now resonate. And I think Prime Minister Modi has made it politically an imperative, especially after passage of the 33% reservation bill in Parliament. So you count them out, make sure that you realize you will never be counted in politics. So I think that is the reality now. We are here. Let's not get comfortable with that reality. Let's find the answers to the gaps these two reports have highlighted.
Thank you so much.